Hi, so we've come to the end of the conference. It's a beautiful day outside, but we're all here to listen to a panel about interoperability of IoT. So it must be important since we're all here. I'd like the panelists to introduce themselves briefly first, and then I've got a question that I'm going to present to each of you along the lines of that urgency. But if you could go ahead and tell us about where you're coming to this space from.
Yeah, my name is Sriram, and I'm not the Ram Sriram who's invested in Google, by the way. Okay. Different guy. I work for the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and I'm the chief of the Software and Systems Division. And my organization, NIST, is a federal government organization, and our mission is to use standards and measurements to improve the US competitiveness in the global markets.
I'm Jessica Groopman. I'm research director and principal analyst at Harbor Research, which is a research firm that looks exclusively at Internet of Things, really across all different segments. And I specialize in consumer-side IoT, and particularly around customer experience, how marketers, how brands can really take what they're already doing in mobile and marketing and add sensors to it. And that has, of course, led me to the big elephant in the room around that, which is privacy. So I also look at digital ethics and how to engage customers about the use of their data.
I'm Tasso. I'm the founder and CEO of Location Labs. We were purchased last year by ABG. The company was founded as a location-based safety and security company around protecting families. So we were the first company to use GPS on phones to locate, to track kids. And then we ended up expanding into doing what is now called IoT. It was called M2M back in the day in terms of GPS tracking. So that's us.
Excellent. So I'm going to ask each of you the same question. We're asking you to each answer this question, and I'll start with Ram. Where do you see the need for standards in IoT most urgently?
Yeah, actually there's an issue here in terms of terminology, because people here talk about IoT, the Internet of Things, but there's also another term called cyber-physical systems, which is used quite a lot, and people kind of confuse these terms, IoT and CPS. Actually, IoT, when we talk about things attached to the internet. And there are two things which you have seen the last few days, that is sensing and actuation. So both the things they have, but the important thing there is control. Like if you have autonomous cars floating around on the road, you want to have some control over the thing. Although the sense and actuate, you need to control. So once you're part of the control and you are in the internet ecosystem, you get to cyber-physical systems. Now, other thing which people forget is humans. So humans are part of this entire ecosystem, the Internet of Things kind of thing. So when you have cyber-physical systems and you add humans to it, you have cyber-physical human systems. Again, in a car or something like that, we've seen some photographs where there's someone reading a newspaper in the car. The human is part of this car, the cyber-physical systems. And then the last thing which is happening is the social networks. So social networks and Internet of Things will combine together. So if you add all these things together, you have what are known as the Internet of Everything, or smart network systems and societies. You can call everything, anything you want. But you have to keep that in mind, that we are not going to do things in isolation like IoT or CPS and things like that. Human beings, everyone will be part of this system. That you're talking about transporting laboratory data, or whatever. So in terms of standards as such, again, there's a whole range of things you can do in terms of Internet of Things about standards. First, you've got to measure things. So you need to have standards for measurement. Like, for example, your temperature sensor. Well, how do you know that's like 54 degrees Fahrenheit or something like that? So you have to measure that thing. So you have standards for measurement. Then there's a lot of times people prescribe on how to develop this Internet of, if you want to set up IoT in your organization, so you can have a prescription of how you set up this IoT within your organization. Then you have performance-based standards. That is, you want to know how well your thermometer functions. The Nest thermometer, for example, does it function well? So how well it functions, those are the performance-based standards you have to put in there. Then now here is the most important standard that I think it is. That's interoperation standards, because your devices will have to talk. The temperature sensor, the Nest sensor has to talk with some other sensor on your body. So these sensors have to be talking with one another. So that kind of interoperation by the way, people again mistake it with integration. System integration is not the same as system interoperability. They're two things. Again, in interoperability, you have to understand that there's a signal which is syntactic interoperability, and again, semantic interoperability, which people kind of mentioned in passing many times when they're talking about metadata and things like that. So semantics, again, plays a big role. What do I do with all the data which is coming in here? And I think at Siemens, you kind of mentioned ontologies and things like that. And ontologies have become extremely important when you're trying to do the semantic interoperability of medical devices. I come from the medical field in a way, because that's one of my portfolios of healthcare. So devices interoperate with one another. You have to have the semantic interoperability into the thing. So that's some of the things about standards. But in terms of the need, you have needs that depending on what you're doing, the need kind of matters. But interoperation is one thing I think is of urgent thing. But then there's also, I think you're probably going to maybe depends, someone may address this in terms of security standards. If not, we'll come back to that later on, and I'll pass it on to the, otherwise I'll be talking here for the next 10 minutes.
Thank you.
I would definitely pick up on the security standards thing. I think that's a huge piece right now. Probably foremost, probably paramount to address. Standards can have a lot of different definitions. We can talk about interoperability standards, security standards, privacy standards, et cetera. Those are completely different things. I think security is really utmost, regardless of how companies are using or abusing people's data. That has to be in place. Second to that, I would say privacy standards, which today are kind of a mess. And even with we are with the laptop and sort of tablet world, mobile smartphone world, it's still a huge mess. So I think that's a really paramount thing to address before we really go into and really drive the wide adoption of connected devices at the consumer level. And of course, interoperability. I look at customer experience, and so much of what I hear is, well, I plugged it in and then it didn't work, or I'm trying to get it to connect to my thermostat in my home or my Apple Watch or whatever it may be. And these things just have to work. This is just a fundamental building block of getting people to adopt these things. So I think that's a huge piece. The other thing I would mention in terms of standards is no one wants to have 100 different mobile apps, one for the refrigerator, one for their connected watch, one for their connected fill in the blank. And so standards have a role there as well, which sort of loops us back to the importance of security standards.
So I think, as a consumer or as an entrepreneur, when I'm thinking about standards, it should be about making things easy and making things safe, and only when necessary, actually. You'd rather just let the market determine that. I think interoperability is a no-brainer. I agree with you. You don't want 400 different apps to manage all your appliances. You'd like the option to at least allow an app to be built to do that. On the security, on the privacy side, I think IoT raises a whole new area, because unlike my data, which, whether Google, Facebook, or the ad networks are looking at what I'm doing online, they're using my data, they're selling it, they're doing stuff with it. But, we can sit here and argue a lot of whether how much of a victim I am of that. Argue not. But when it comes to something like a connected insulin pump, and a hacker can hack in and then all of a sudden alter my body chemistry, or when my wife's driving home with the kids, if somebody hacks into the car and is able to crash into the wall, I think what you're seeing with IoT, when we're connecting everything, we're connecting physical devices, and all of a sudden you can inflict physical harm on people. So that changes the standard, and from my perspective, as a kind of very libertarian-minded entrepreneur who says no regulation, I think there are things that are very different about IoT versus just digital data that we have to take into account.
If I may add to that, actually, in terms of security, there are several layers around here. The device level security you have to ensure, and then the devices are talking over the wireless. So there's a wireless security has to be ensured, and wireless is over the network. So the network security has to be. So there's so many holes, open holes around here that you need to patch before you do anything. So.
Yeah. Do you think that the lack of standards and maybe specifically the lack of interoperability is going to stunt the growth of IoT? Or do you think that consumers and enterprises are so anxious to get the benefits of IoT that they're going to go ahead and adopt it anyway?
You want me to start on that? Okay. The thing which I would like to point out is that actually it's interesting to note that standards contribute more to economic growth than patents and licenses. Someone did a study in Germany, and they figured out from 1990 to 1996, the GDP growth was about 3.3%. Out of that, 0.9% is attributed to proper use of standards. So standards actually lead to innovation in many sense. And in fact, for those of you who are musicians in the audience, the musical notation spawned thousands, hundreds of years of innovation in music as such. Okay, it can, but standards have to be done at the right time. So they will, and someone actually made a point that Boeing is really hundreds of standards flying in a close formation. Okay, so that's part of what standards are. So standards are required for, especially when you're talking about heterogeneous systems and things like that, so they spark innovation. However, if standards are not done properly, you may have a problem. The problem is like the QWERTY board. You know, all of you actually are using QWERTY. That's a de facto, became a de facto standard. Standards can be either de facto or voluntary or regulatory, and there are several types of standards. It became a de facto standard. Now, the problem is QWERTY is not the most efficient way of doing things now. The reason why QWERTY was done at that time, that's QWERTY, your keyboard, is that because the typewriter is a mechanical system and it was typing too fast with anything else, so they wanted to slow it down. To slow it down, they use this QWERTY model. But that actually hampers innovation in a way, because if they had used Dvorak keyboard or something like that, we would have typed faster than what we are doing right now. So standards have to be put in the right time, in the right place, so then you have to use caution on that. But they are important for innovation.
Sure. Jessica?
Yeah, I think it will stifle adoption, but I don't think it will halt adoption or sort of throw off the course of IoT, whatever that is. But I think, again, from a customer experience standpoint, it's just frustrating. It's just annoying when things don't work. And I think as customers today, we really expect rapid sort of, I need to be able to plug this in and it needs to work, and I don't want to deal with it, you know, anywhere beyond that point. So from a CX standpoint, absolutely. I think another point to be made around this is kind of the incentive in place from a business standpoint, which is capitalistic, which is closed, so to speak, as in, you know, Google and Apple don't want to collaborate with each other, but the reality is there are lots of us who use both of these products and services and devices, and Google and Apple are just two. There are many. And so kind of this business framework or paradigm of, you know, our data is proprietary and we don't want to share it with anyone and it remains in this sort of walled garden versus, say, for example, the academic institution or university paradigm or way of thinking of sort of the more we share data, the better, will also stifle growth. So I think there's sort of an interoperability in terms of data and the use cases and the value that can be extracted from that data, just kind of given the nature of how organizations work today.
Sure. Tasso?
I mean, I love Ram's analogies. I mean, the written language is a standard, right? I mean, imagine we didn't have the alphabet, we couldn't write to each other. Think how would, how productive would we be, or where would the world be? So standards are immensely valuable. I do think as a serious quantified self person who uses all the IoT things, the lack of interoperability, the lack of promotional standards, the lack of Apple and Google cooperation holds back innovation, I think, tremendously. I think we see with obviously financing, Kickstarter, everything, there's lots of devices out there, there's lots of innovation, but the magic comes with how you morph these things together, and that's not happening. I mean, you know, I'm trying to correlate my Fitbit with my basis sleep and my weight and my stress levels for using other stuff, and I can't do it. I have to manually enter stuff into Excel spreadsheet and do things myself. That seems very broken, and we're not really achieving the full potential.
Well, Tasso, I think you're the only member of this panel that's coming from a vendor. What are you doing at Location Labs to solve that problem and to address that lack of the standards? What are you doing along those lines?
Well, so right now we are running a bunch of new product tests. Think about it in kind of internal entrepreneurship that we have going on in the company. And one of the areas that we're focusing on is wellness, for lack of a better term, but we don't see any product that combines a lot of really good wearables into an aggregated app that can do more than just track my steps on Fitbit, so combining those things. And what we're finding is that interoperability is an issue. So it goes back to the old days where we're kind of scraping and trying to have to determine what this means by this time of day. So we're trying to fix the lack of interoperability problem by kind of engineering and and using scraping technology rather than just being open to us and being able to build the service quickly.
In fact, if I may, on that interoperability issue, like if you take in the healthcare world, the lack of interoperability in the electronic health records is costing us, there's a study done, about $80 billion a year. So if you do that for about 10 years, I think President Obama could solve the budget deficit problem. Okay? just having the interoperability. So.
And healthcare is a big issue.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about that vertical of healthcare. Last year I spoke with Dr. Julian Goldman. He does interoperability over at Mass General. And he said that there are so many protocols in use in a typical hospital room that he's afraid that the Internet of Things will become just a pile of things because they can't talk to each other. And I wondered if any of you have some thoughts in terms of what has to happen in that particular area that's of concern to so many of us in terms of interoperability.
Yeah, may I start? Healthcare is a $2.7 trillion industry, by the way, which is actually half the GDP of many countries like Japan. And there are two verticals here, healthcare and manufacturing. Manufacturing is about $1.7 trillion. So both these industries are very vital to our economy. And out of that $2.7 trillion or so, the doctors only get paid about $500 billion. So the rest of the money is going elsewhere. So there's a lot of inefficiencies in the system. And those inefficiencies have to be plugged. And medical devices, in fact, there was a recent study done, which is what Julian Goldman works on, medical devices in hospitals. There are two kinds of medical devices, by the way. That is, medical devices in the hospitals. Okay, those are personal care devices. So I don't know actually, some devices they call it. Okay, and the second one is the devices that you wear on your person. Okay, those are the Fitbits and the weighing machine that you saw, things like that. So two kinds of devices. And in a hospital itself, they don't integrate with one another, and that's a big problem what Julian is facing around here. And then now you have this personal care actually devices which are on you, like the Fitbit and things like that, which have to again communicate with the rest of the world. There are some standards, like for example, there is this IEEE standard 11073 for the devices in the hospital going on, and then Julian Goldman has come up with an ANSI or some other standard. I think presumably you know about it, and he has made some very good strides on that, and we're working closely with him on that. And then the devices like Fitbits and things like that, again, they have to communicate, and then all of them have to go into the electronic health records. And I don't know, I think there is a Eric Topol. Have you heard of that guy? Eric Topol. He wrote a very nice book, Patients Like Me, something like that.
I read it.
So and he kind of explains to that, one of the issues involved in those things. So there are a number of things going on around here. There's the hospital devices talking to one another. There's the personal care devices, or the devices on you talking to one another, and so on. So there's a lot of things that need to be addressed there. Important problem. So I'm sorry. Yeah. And the security, which I guess is your domain.
I was going to say, I think this is where, in particular, healthcare is where interoperability meets with security. And also identity access management. Who can access these devices, and not just who as in a person or an employee, but what other systems, what other types of devices can access each other. And this, from an interoperability standpoint, is what sort of makes or breaks the value of a connected device. But also is what opens up the device or the data or the processes or even the end patient to vulnerability, to hacking. You mentioned, the infusion pump. Hospira, I believe it was called. It was just an infusion pump that was found to have a vulnerability in it. And this is a matter of someone's lives. It's not just does my Fitbit work or not. So I think again, this is really where security and interoperability sort of merge.
I think healthcare is a kind of a comically absurd place, in my opinion. I mean, the Hippocratic Oath tells doctors that you should not tell your patient what's really going on. You have the right to do so. You have the right to lie to them, as per the Hippocratic Oath. There's a God complex that exists in the AMA, and as a result, 23andMe can't tell you what you want between you and them, what the system, what the data tells you, because they decided that that was wrong. So if we face interoperability issues with just like random IoT things between my toaster and my fridge, like good luck with healthcare. It is going to be a disaster and a mess. And it's really too bad because I think the panelists probably agree with me. There's an enormous value here. Eric Topol's book is an amazing book where he's a doctor and he's saying what a bunch of BS it is. The point is, if I want to see, use wellness effects, for example, which is what I use for my blood test, and compare it to other things around medical device, I can't do it because if something is categorized as a medical device, your path to market is probably 5 years longer than it should be, and it holds everything back. So I think there's a structural, philosophical issue. I think other countries like Switzerland, are going to step up and say, hey, this is a no-brainer. We have great technology that is going to provide great health benefits to people, so people are going to start heading over there rather than the United States.
So we've talked about the need for interoperability and standards. What's the good news? What's going well in terms of interoperability? Is there progress being made in particular areas that holds out some promise?
I'll start from you on that because you are in the industry, so you have a better idea of.
I mean, I would say the real news is that we continue to see innovation, and with innovation means more consumers are going to be buying things, and this is going to be driven by consumers. They're going to be yelling and screaming, and eventually the industry is going to catch up. So I haven't seen a decrease in any innovation. There's even more Kickstarter campaigns now. There's amazing stuff that people presented here at the conference. So that's the good sign, and I think the industry is going to catch up. It's going to be consumer driven.
I wish I were a little bit more optimistic. I'm optimistic long term. Short term, though, I'm not that impressed with a lot of the connected stuffs that come out. CES every year is sort of, I don't know, it's a lot of wearables and things that I don't know, particularly if they didn't operate with anything else. I don't know how valuable they would be. That said, I think where we're seeing more innovation that's, I think, more compelling is in the services. How is the data from any of these connected whatevers actually being used? How is it actually solving problems? Is it actually worth putting a sensor on something? Just because we can doesn't always mean we should. So long term, I think, there's, tremendous value, obviously, to be gained. That's why we're all here. But short term, we still have some stumbling blocks.
But actually, there's a positive thing to it because the number of organizations, standards organizations, are working on that. For example, IEEE are the International Engineering Task Force, IETF. They have a number of standards which they're working on. Then there is an ISO, IEC, Joint Technical Commission. They are also working on standards. So there's a lot of standards organizations which are international standards organizations which are working in the IoT/CPS space. There are also private industry like Industrial Internet Consortium, IIC, Internet Open Consortium. There's a lot of consortia which are there who are working on standards in this area.
Well, Ram, some people have pointed out that having a lot of different organizations working on standards doesn't necessarily get us anywhere because if they're all doing different things, then there isn't really standardization. Are these organizations working with each other to the point right now where they're making some progress from your observation?
Yeah, some of them are. Like, for example, ISO and IEC, they're getting together, having a joint task force kind of thing, a joint technical committee. Sometimes they work independent. Sometimes they work on different aspects of it. For example, IEEE P2413 is an architectural standard it's related to IoT architectures, so they're working on a different space. On the other hand, things like Industrial Internet Consortium, they're working on specific industry-oriented kind of things. Eventually, it will go into IEEE or ISO and things like that. So it's good to have many standards in a way, okay? Keeps us busy. But on the other hand, I think there'll be some consolidation at some point in the thing. There's a fragmented nature of the standards, and there needs to be a consolidation. And one of the things we try to do at NIST is try and participate in a number of these activities and see if we can make these connections.
Yeah, I think it's a function of where we are in the industry. It's the early days on the disruption curve. We're like here, and so there's just this proliferation of standards bodies, of hardware types, of protocols. I mean, it's sort of all over the place in every direction. I agree with you, though, that it's better that they exist than not. And we are seeing some partnerships. I think Allseen Alliance just joined with the industrial, which is great. So there's that. And I think over time these things will continue to sort of coalesce. I know even at the hardware, at the product level, more and more even startups are making their products interoperable with more types of, connectivity protocols, for example.
Tasso, anything to add on that?
I mean, these are the experts, so.
Sure, yeah. Do you think that there is a limit to how far this consolidates? I mean, one thing that we hear about IoT is that it presents the opportunity to bring together data from many different realms and to come to new kinds of conclusions with data that's never been combined before. On the other hand, it is a very diverse space, and when you try to consider the entire scope of IoT, do you believe that there will be interoperability across the board here, or is there simply a natural limit to how much standardization ultimately can happen across IoT?
Well, it's an evolutionary process, that's what I would say. So there will be one-to-one connections. There'll be, once things are accepted, then you'll have more depending on the need. It all depends on the needs as such. Okay, so we'll have standards coming into the picture. And then eventually, as I said, the ultimate goal, in my opinion, is what is called as a self-integrated systems. And for self-integrated systems to happen, considerable work has to be done in semantics and ontologies and things like that. That's the way to go, but we will get there at some point. Question is, I don't know when. Maybe.
Yeah, that's $1 million question. That's a bazillion. What is it? The 13 trillion, whatever the predictions are for IoT. That's the $13 trillion question. I would say that not everything should be connected necessarily. And I think sort of the more thoughtful and considered the industry is, instead of just slapping sensors and collecting data onto and from every single thing, is probably a better approach than just, again, sort of, now we can go do it, let's go do it. Because there are tremendous implications, again, from privacy, from a security, from a safety standpoint, that have to be taken into consideration.
So I think that all the cool scenarios are taking all this great IoT and sensor data and mashing it up and coming up with cool things. I think it's going to happen. It's a natural thing. The market will drive it. I think talking to IoT entrepreneurs, what I see is they have a really cool hardware, but everybody wants to be a software company. I want to be this information/SaaS. I want to be information network effect and a SaaS product because that's where the money is. That's where I get my valuation. The problem is they're really good hardware, and the software really should be just open API mashup. So I think that has to click with entrepreneurs, and that has to become a viable business model that companies become really successful, go public on that kind of model, and then you see a flood of people saying, of course, I'm open API, and I'm a really good hardware company, and I have great sensor information, and I'm able to provide that. So I think it holds us back a little bit. Entrepreneurs I talk to, they're very, I need to own the software, and I'm not going to open it up.
Internet open consortia. There's a lot of consortia which are there who are working on standards in this area.
Well, Ram, some people have pointed out that having a lot of different organizations working on standards doesn't necessarily get us anywhere, because if they're all doing different things, then there isn't really standardization. Are these organizations working with each other to the point right now where they're making some progress from your observation?
Yeah, some of them are. Like, for example, ISO and IEC, they're getting together, having a joint task force kind of thing, a joint technical committee. Sometimes they work independently. Sometimes they work on different aspects of it. For example, IEEE P2413 is an architectural standard it's related to IoT architectures, so they're working on a different space. On the other hand, things like Industrial Internet Consortium, they're working on specific industry-oriented kind of things. Eventually, it will go into IEEE or ISO and things like that. So it's good to have many standards in a way, okay? Keeps us busy. But on the other hand, I think there'll be some consolidation at some point in the thing. There's a fragmented nature of the standards, and there needs to be a consolidation. And one of the things we try to do at NIST is try and participate in a number of these activities and see if we can make these connections.
Yeah, I think it's a function of where we are in the industry. It's the early days on the disruption curve. We're like here, and so there's just this proliferation of standards bodies, of hardware types, of protocols. I mean, it's sort of all over the place in every direction. I agree with you, though, that it's better that they exist than not, and we are seeing some partnerships. I think Allseen Alliance just joined with the industrial, which is great. So there's that, and I think over time these things will continue to sort of coalesce. I know even at the hardware, at the product level, you know, more and more even startups are making their products interoperable with more types of, you know, connectivity protocols, for example.
Tasso, anything to add on that?
I mean, these are the experts, so.
Sure, yeah. Do you think that there is a limit to how far this consolidates? I mean, one thing that we hear about IoT is that it presents the opportunity to bring together data from many different realms and to come to new kinds of conclusions with data that's never been combined before. On the other hand, it is a very diverse space, and when you try to consider the entire scope of IoT, do you believe that there will be interoperability across the board here, or is there simply a natural limit to how much standardization ultimately can happen across IoT?
Well, it's an evolutionary process, that's what I would say. So there will be one-to-one connections. There'll be, once things are accepted, then you'll have more depending on the need. It's all depends on the needs as such. Okay, so we'll have standards coming into the picture. And then eventually, as I said, the ultimate goal, in my opinion, is what is called as a self-integrated systems. And for self-integrated systems to happen, considerable work has to be done in semantics and ontologies and things like that. That's the way to go, but we will get there at some point. Question is, I don't know when. Maybe.
Yeah, that's $1 million question. That's a bazillion. What is it? The 13 trillion, whatever the predictions are for IoT. That's, you know, the $13 trillion question. I would say that not everything should be connected necessarily. And I think sort of the more thoughtful and considered the industry is, instead of just slapping sensors and collecting data onto and from every single thing, is probably a better approach than just, again, sort of, now we can go do it, let's go do it. Because there are tremendous implications, again, from privacy, from a security, from a safety standpoint, that have to be taken into consideration.
So I think that all the cool scenarios are taking all this great IoT and sensor data and mashing it up and coming up with cool things. I think it's going to happen. It's natural. I think the market will drive it. I think talking to IoT entrepreneurs, what I see is they have a really cool hardware, but everybody wants to be a software company. I want to be this information/SaaS. I want to be information network effect and a SaaS product because that's where the money is. That's where I get my valuation. The problem is they're really good hardware, and the software really should be just open API mashup. So I think that has to click with entrepreneurs, and that has to become a viable business model that companies become really successful, go public on that kind of model, and then you'll see a flood of people saying, of course, I'm open API, and I'm a really good hardware company, and I have great sensor information, and I'm able to provide that. So I think it holds us back a little bit. Entrepreneurs I talk to, they're very, I need to own the software, and I'm not going to open it up.